Karoline Leavitt doesn't have any good economic news to talk about. So as always, she turned to topics of identity, tweeting, NASA nominee plans to prioritize America First agenda in space, not DEI. And there's a lot of things that are weird about this. The first thing is that guy, Jared Isaacman, who they're planning to put as the head of NASA. As far as I have seen, he hasn't actually said anything about whether he's in favor of DEI and NASA or whatever. They're just sort of implying that he would be against it for some reason because Trump is, which is a little strange. It's also, it's a pretty old article that she's choosing to send out again, which that's a little bit strange. But also the idea that thank God we now have the Trump regime in charge of our space program, because they would never care about identity. Little problem with that. So this article said NASA publishes Artemis plan to land first woman, next man on moon in 2024. And if you look closely, if you're on a device where you can see that, that's from 2020. That was Trump's first term NASA that put out that plan. It wasn't like Joe Biden's woke NASA that cared about putting a woman on the moon. Trump's NASA cared about putting a woman on the moon. The issue is that we didn't really talk about DEI back then. They hadn't been trained to freak out about it. Back then, they, like us, would think, oh, isn't it great that America can send both men and women to the moon? It would be a thing of national pride, but now they've been trained to look through a very narrow and specific identity-based lens. And that's how they've changed really on this topic. Since the beginning of Trump's second term, his administration has taken direct aim at DEI initiatives across basically the entirety of government agencies, going so far as to force NASA to purge all mentions of women in leadership on its websites. Again, not like references to how women should be leaders. These are women who were leaders, did good jobs, but you can't acknowledge it because they're women. They have the merit, but unfortunately they have an identity that they don't like to focus on. So this is identity over merit, and it's not the only example of that. You might have seen the news this week that Pete Hegseth apparently stepped in to stop a female Navy officer from being given a historic title. We don't know who the officer is, but apparently she was set to be the first woman in Naval Special Warfare Command after becoming the first woman to serve with SEAL Team 6 as a troop commander. And the actual SEALs say that she was the best person for the job. But Pete Hegseth stopped her anyway. She had the merit, but he didn't like her identity. It is the exact inverse of what they try to pitch their approach as being. This is not about merit without concern for identity. It's the preeminence of identity over everything else. And you see it whether it's Hegseth, whether it's NASA, even the press secretary, it's all that they care about. Yas, what do you think? I know that you've got a connection to the space program.
Yeah, I mean, so growing up around here, everything is about space, right? You see it everywhere you go, specifically in the neighborhood where I grew up in Houston. The complex is huge. So many people work for NASA. It is a major employer here, not NASA just on its own, but also the contractors that work for NASA or who contribute to the space program. And it's funny how they're trying to make this even an America First agenda, because how is space America? It just doesn't make any sense. Why would all of space be America First? America isn't a real thing. It's geography with political boundaries, and none of that extends into space. Also, NASA as an institution is generally very progressive just by its nature, just by the nature of the work that it does and the ways in which it goes about doing that work. However, it is a government agency, so it is constantly having to balance its own goals and its progression towards those goals, the way that it tries to achieve those goals with the wills and the whims of the administration, right? They're constantly worried about getting their funding cut. They're constantly worried about if that funding gets cut, these programs have to get cut. These workers would have to get cut. All of the progress that we have made towards certain things would just have to go away. And there are so many qualified people working within the NASA complex. It is unbelievable. There is an incredible amount of talent and skill here. And to diminish anyone's accomplishments by saying, oh, you're a woman's, what decade are we in, right? Why do people not understand that women are smart? Is it because you're so insecure that you can't? If you're a man, it's just like racism, right? It's so dumb. You have to be a dumb person to be a misogynist or to be a racist, right? Because you can't comprehend the idea that there are people who are not like you who are also worthy of something, right? That is the thing that your brain can't handle, or I should say, all of your value as a human being comes from a thing that you were born as it all comes from something that you had zero control over, whether that's your sex, gender, your race, whatever, your attractiveness even. So all of that, you say, look, just because I was born this way, I'm better than all those other people who just happen to be born not this way. And that is where all of my self-worth comes from, not because of my own accomplishments, not because of who I am as a person, not because of my integrity, but because of this one thing that I had zero control over. And it is incredibly weak. And unfortunately, we have a government that is being run by very, very weak and insecure individuals.
Yeah. No, I'm so glad that you said that, because I've tried to make that case for a very long time. The idea that any of these people who are so riven with the isms and the misogyny and all that they could be intellectuals. Like, no, your desire to believe that you were born better trumps your ability. It stops your ability to actually be able to discern what's happening in the real world, because you want to believe that you are better. That's why they project and say that everybody else is so focused on identity. It is the most important thing to them. The same people who complain about representation in media, for them, it is the most important thing. They think someone who wants to see one person in a movie that looks like them has a problem. Meanwhile, they demand that 100% of people in movies look like them. And so again, this is all just projection, and I agree, it is utter weakness. You can call it intellectual weakness if you're one of those people that, like Jesse Waters, is super focused on masculinity. I think it's a weakness in that form as well, and they need to get better.